Thank you very much, Mary. It's a real honour to speak to you this morning. I think it's very important that young people like yourselves are interested in this topic and take the time to inform yourselves and two very interesting challenges in the last two speakers, and both of them suggesting practical things that you could perhaps do. Dimna and Mark have given you a very good overview of the negotiations, so I'm not going to replicate that. When I was thinking about what I might say, I thought to myself, what could I say that might be of use to these young people? And I thought maybe as the oldest member on the panel, by some distance, I could perhaps begin to put things in a historical perspective before going on to talk about some of the challenges that you face and some of the opportunities you have. And I think just to put that historical perspective into context, maybe we need to answer the question, why is it out of 193 countries negotiating these Sustainable Development Goals, why is it that Ireland has been asked to be one of two countries to lead the process? One could put some of it down to the quality of our diplomats and ambassadors, and there is no doubt that's a factor. But the deeper reason is because of the long track record this country has in regard to these issues. Some of that track record goes back a very long way. It goes back to Ireland as a source of educators from essentially to other parts of the world from essentially the 6th century onwards. And when you get up to closer to modern day, but still somewhat distant, we have the whole missionary tradition that really came into its own, I suppose, in the middle of the 19th century and continued and made a massive contribution to many, many different countries. And then in more recent times, as the missionary wave began to diminish with the reduction in vocations to religious life, you had a new form of organization which really came in the late 60s and early 70s, the development of the NGO sector. And among the notable NGOs that are still with us, I suppose the biggest ones concern Trócaire and Goal. So to get a sense of this and make real these two traditions, the longer-term missionary one, the NGO wave, which led to, particularly in the 1970s and the 1980s, a wave of young volunteers to different countries, which ultimately provided some of the bedrock of support for the aid program in this country. Could I suggest to you that each of you maybe this evening ask your parents or maybe your grandparents, have any of us in our family got a connection to these traditions, the missionary or the NGO tradition? More recently then, in the 80s, we had the great Ethiopian famine, and the response to that internationally was led by an Irishman, Bob Geldof, and the organisation of Band Aid and Live Aid, assisted by Bono. There are people who criticise both of these people. I don't. I think each of them have made an immense contribution. A little bit later on, when Mary Robinson was president, she highlighted the attention of the world to the famine in Somalia. And that, again, was making visible the caring of Irish people for issues elsewhere. And then you come up to the more modern times and the significance of the Millennium Development Goals establishment in 2000, but that was the time as well when the Irish government, through the then Taoiseach Bertie Ahern, made a formal commitment that the Irish would meet a 0.7% aid target by 2007. Now that hasn't happened, and it's unfortunate it hasn't happened, but it was an important moment, because what it did give rise to was that there was a clear government commitment to achieve this, And following on from that, there was a review group which set out to define how Ireland could best play its role through a very effective aid programme in spending that increased budget that was then anticipated. As I said, the anticipated budget didn't fully emerge. The aid programme was substantially increased. But what it did amount to, what it did lead to, was, I think, an increasing professionalisation of the Irish aid programme from about 2000 onwards. And the high quality of that aid programme has really, that's another part of why it is, and the reputation it has, that's another part of the reason why it is Ireland has got to be asked, was asked to lead this process. So there are very strong historical reasons why Ireland is seen to be a leader in this field. But crucial to that is the fact that the constant here over decades is the support of the Irish people in mandating the government to spend this money and to give prominence to Irish aid as part of Irish foreign policy. So that's the legacy that you are inheriting. And that's the basis, the opportunity now you build upon. So we now look to the next 15 years, and it's not going to be the same as the past 15 years or indeed the past number of decades. But there is a very strong basis from which to develop new approaches to aid programs and to deal with the world as it has evolved. And I'd like just to conclude by suggesting a number of areas where I think you can play an important role in this regard. The first is that we as a country, with a high quality, good aid programme, we have to keep that. It has to remain as a key part of our foreign policy. And so you as voters, currently or to be, need to reflect that and give that message to the politicians and through your parents as well. I think you need to inform yourselves about some of the big issues that should be dealt with in that aid programme. And could I suggest that one way to do that is to, I currently lead an organisation called the Institute for International and European Affairs, Iiea, and in association with Irish Aid sponsor a series of lectures in the Iiea of top quality world thinkers on development issues. And all these lectures are up on our website, and the most recent one indeed is Amina Mohammed, who was referred to a little bit earlier on. I think a second area where you could play a role is focusing on particular aspects of the aid programme, which are critically important, which should remain priority within the aid programme, and which actually connect back to issues of relevance to this country. And the two that I would cite is the whole area of, firstly, of nutrition, and secondly, of climate change. It's probably true to say that in the past decade, the area that Ireland has had most influence on the international policy agenda is in relation to nutrition. We've seen to be playing a real leadership role on this topic. And we need to keep that leadership role, and we need to keep a focus on that in a future aid programme. And all the indications are that the government and Foreign Affairs and Irish Aid are very clear about that. But there is a connection back here at home as well, because when people talk about malnutrition, the common notion is that we're talking about undernutrition. But malnutrition is what it's called, malnutrition. It could be under or over nutrition. And what we are seeing in this country is the growth of obesity, which is beginning to be a really serious public health problem, and we need to take account of that. When in Concern, we were leading a programme, a campaign, to put a focus on the first 1,000 days of life as a crucial, importantly phase of a child's life and the development, the first 1,000 days. We spoke here to people in UCD and the National Maternity Hospital, and they had issues about the first 1,000 days here in Ireland. But it was the first 1,000 days and the fact that increasing number of women presenting for birth, significantly overweight, producing significantly overweight children, and so that is a real problem. So there is a connection between, some of the things we will deal with in our aid program and some of our public policy places at home. Second issue, I think, is in regard to climate change. This is the big issue for your generation. If, as Dimna says, if this issue is not got right, not only in your lifetime, but more especially in the lifetime of your children and grandchildren, this world may not be livable in for hundreds of millions of people. So we have to get more serious about climate change. And we have to start by having a credible policy for Ireland. And if we have a credible policy for Ireland, we can be credible when we're advocating for the rest of the world. A third area where I think you can take real interest is in the whole possibility of development, of innovation and technology to help the development process. The whole mobile phone revolution in Africa and elsewhere is giving rise to immense possibilities to skip almost a generation of development. And as I go each year to that wonderful institution, the Young Scientist Exhibition, increasingly I see projects there which are focusing innovation on development issues. And that is something, again, I think you as young people could engage with. And finally, the very last thing is the whole business of activism, of getting involved. Mark gave a very interesting menu of possibilities there, and I would very much encourage you to follow some of those, or to look around, to find the thing that you are most interested in the development space, to identify the NGO that is catering for that particular interest, and to engage and to define. It's your future, it's your responsibility to deal with it, and I think there is huge, important, exciting possibilities to really make a difference for the coming years. Thank you very much indeed.